Another escalation in the trade dispute between China and Canada. This morning, China announced a preliminary anti-dumping duty on Canadian canola imports.
China is taking aim at Canadian canola farmers. Beijing's new tariff on exports of raw canola from Canada at a rate of nearly 76% are now in place.
Canada has stunned China, turning a 75.8% tariff on canola into a major victory. When Beijing announced the almost strangling 75.8% duty on Canadian canola exports, many feared this cornerstone of the agricultural sector would be devastated, perhaps even collapse. Yet, what unfolded was entirely different. Instead of retreating, Canada's canola industry quickly pivoted, seeking out new markets and boosting product value. In reality, the heavy tariff from China became a catalyst, forcing Canadian businesses to actively expand exports to other countries across Asia, Europe, and even North America. These efforts not only freed Canadian canola from overdependence on a single market, but also opened a more sustainable path forward. Farmers and companies are no longer pinning all their hopes on China. They are now building a diverse network.
Now we're calling on the federal government to take immediate action to help canola growers during this unprecedented situation. The Chinese government has clearly launched the tariffs at this time of year to cause maximum impact and maximum uncertainty.
Overnight, billions of dollars in trade evaporated. Farmers faced the risk of losing everything, and markets seemed on the verge of collapse. Yet what looked like a fatal blow quickly turned into one of the most remarkable turnarounds in international trade. Instead of falling into crisis, Canada chose to adapt, restructure, and transform those punishing tariffs into a springboard for a greater leap forward. What seemed destined to cripple Canada's canola sector ultimately backfired, opening the door to a new phase of growth and leaving China to face unintended consequences. This is the story of how Canada turned crisis into advantage. When Beijing imposed anti-dumping duties of up to 75.8% on Canadian canola imports, the prairies were shaken. For years, China had been one of the largest buyers of Canadian canola, generating nearly $5 billion. The move looked like a death blow, but in truth, this was never just about canola or agriculture. It carried a distinctly political undertone. Recently, Canada, together with the United States and Europe, imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles in response to Beijing's growing economic expansion. It didn't take long for China to retaliate, targeting canola, one of Canada's strategic export products. On paper, it looked like a flawless move. Undermining such a high-value agricultural commodity was expected to force Ottawa into retreat and concessions. Yet, the calculation ran into a major obstacle. Canada was not as fragile as Beijing assumed. The country's agricultural sector has been tested many times in trade wars, from disputes over beef and wheat to bans on various farm products. Canadian farmers have honed the ability to adapt swiftly. At the same time, the government has built support mechanisms and protective measures to help agriculture weather international turbulence. By all logic, this enormous tariff should have made Canada stumble, but reality turned out differently. Instead of collapsing, it became the launchpad for a surprising turning point. What first appeared to be a crushing defeat has slowly transformed into a story of resilience and renewal, something China never expected. Beijing believed Canada would quickly retreat, but the outcome went in the opposite direction, overturning the balance in global agriculture. Rather than bowing to pressure and absorbing losses, Canada responded with force. Just days after Beijing's announcement, the government in Ottawa rolled out an emergency package of measures to help farmers ride out the storm. Price stabilization quickly expanded into markets beyond Beijing. The goal was clear: break into new markets. With global demand for canola rising sharply, the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and several Southeast Asian countries seized the chance to step in as replacement buyers. The results were striking. Within just one quarter, exports to these regions soared by 20 to 30%. A blow that seemed devastating has instead opened a golden opportunity for Canada to diversify and break free from overdependence on a single market. Driven by necessity, the country sought out many more partners, strengthening its long-term position in global markets. In other words, What China intended as a harsh punishment ultimately became an opportunity for Canada to rise higher. Tariffs that seemed designed to weaken the industry have instead made Canadian canola stronger, more diverse, and more independent than ever. Canada is not simply exporting more canola seeds. What is truly taking place is a fundamental shift in how the crop is valued and developed, and here lies the greatest victory. Market diversification is only the beginning. Canadian agriculture has quickly realized that securing a sustainable future requires more than exporting raw seeds in bulk. In the past, canola was often shipped overseas as a low-margin commodity, vulnerable to the swings of trade disputes. Yet, China's tariff shock has inadvertently spurred Canada to accelerate its move toward advanced processing and value-added production. This means that instead of just exporting seeds, canola is now being transformed into refined cooking oil, plant-based proteins, and even bio-based compounds for renewable energy. For industry leaders, this is a new era, one where Canadian canola is poised to play a much bigger and more profitable role on the world stage. This marks nothing short of a strategic breakthrough. As one executive put it bluntly, "We are no longer just selling seeds. We are selling solutions for food and energy security." By upgrading the value chain, Canada is no longer just a crop supplier, but a strategic partner across multiple sectors. The results came almost immediately. Global food corporations began turning to Canadian canola oil as demand surged for healthier products. At the same time, energy companies recognized its immense potential in producing clean biofuels. What once looked like an insurmountable agricultural crisis has instead opened trade doors worth billions of dollars. This is the true essence of the transformation. Canada has regained the initiative. No longer trapped in the role of a raw materials supplier vulnerable to tariffs, the country now exports specialized, high-value products. That reality forces any nation seeking to exert pressure to think twice, because in doing so, they risk losing access to a vital supply for the food, health, and renewable energy industries. This transformation has not only allowed Canada to step out from under China's shadow, but it has also positioned the country as a powerful force in global markets, with the resilience and adaptability to thrive in a rapidly changing world. But it has also elevated the entire industry to a new level. What began as a survival response has evolved into a foundation for long-term competitiveness, positioning Canada as a true player on the global economic stage. While Canada has been steadily lifting its canola industry to new heights, China, on the other hand, has begun to feel the heavy consequences of its own tariff policy. The actual outcome has been far from what Beijing expected. The imposition of a 75.8% tariff on Canadian canola was initially seen as a show of strength, but in the end, it backfired, inflicting significant costs on China's own economy. With the flow of reliable and competitively priced Canadian supply cut off, Chinese food processing firms and biofuel producers were forced to turn to far more expensive alternatives. The result? A surge in prices for cooking oil, animal feed, and even domestic clean energy projects. In other words, the tariff strategy boomeranged. Instead of weakening Canada, the policy drove up costs within China, precisely at a time when its economy was slowing, and international pressures were mounting. Replacing Canadian canola has proven difficult, as few countries can match Canada in terms of scale, quality, and reliability. Meanwhile, Canadian farmers managed to turn the tide. The fear of losing their biggest customer quickly gave way to opportunities to break into new markets, often with higher margins. Diversified exports reduced reliance on any single partner, while value-added processing strategies made Canadian products far harder to replace. What was designed as a pressure tactic ultimately made Canada stronger on the global trade map. Ironically, China ended up proving Canada's own point. Tariffs and protectionism may produce short-term effects, but over the long run, they inevitably reveal their downsides. As Beijing struggles with rising costs, Canada has demonstrated adaptability, innovation, and the ability to expand strategic partnerships, qualities that no tariff barrier can contain. Analysts argue this confrontation could become a textbook example of an economic miscalculation, where a well-intended strategy not only fails to achieve its objectives, but ends up strengthening the very entity it sought to weaken. Rather than forcing Canada to bow, China inadvertently helped it build a stronger, more resilient, and future-ready canola industry. So, what is the larger picture? This story is not merely about canola, it is a clear demonstration of the power of turning challenges into opportunities. China believed that a 75.8% tariff would deliver a crushing blow to Canada, but the reality has been the exact opposite. By swiftly expanding into new markets, focusing on value-added processing, and showcasing remarkable flexibility, Canada has transformed what looked like a short-term shock into the foundation for lasting advantage. The lesson is clear. In the global trade game, sheer force is not enough to determine winners and losers. Strategy, persistence, and the capacity to pivot are what truly define success. Canada has not only weathered this storm, it has emerged stronger, proving that real strength lies in turning pressure into progress. And in this standoff, it was not China that shocked the world, it was Canada that delivered the global jolt.